Hey everyone, welcome to the CSI Secret Store community call. Today is August 31st, 2023. This call is recorded and will be published on YouTube, and it follows CNCF Code of Conduct. If you already haven't added your names to the agenda list, please go ahead and add yourself. I will help moderate the meeting today. Anyone wants to volunteer to take notes?
I can do it.
Thanks, Mo. Okay. So there are only few items in the discussion items. So the first one is follow-up discussion on secret store CSI driver caching. For some context, we discussed about this in the SIGOT call yesterday. And more, Andrea, do you want to talk about it? Just to go over what we discussed yesterday?
I'm happy to speak. I wanted to give other folks more of a floor if they have thoughts. Like I have thoughts, but I don't know. I spoke a lot yesterday, so I wanted to hear from others before I started, basically.
I think Amit was not on the call, so I was just thinking, should we just give him like a TLDR on what it is? And
yeah, I can take that. So I guess at a high level, right? We spoke about two distinct, but at least at some level related changes that we're considering in Secret CSI. One of them is the capability of running Secret CSI in an environment that may be disconnected from the remote service that provides the secrets for some amount of time. And it may go through like node upgrades or restarts during that time. So it's not just disconnected by itself, it's disconnected plus restarts. So that's one problem we're trying to solve. And the other problem is the existing secret sync feature has come under like scrutiny from basically sort of violating some of the principles of the secret CSI project, but also I know at a technical level initially it has issues just in the way it's implemented because it arbitrarily couples a secret or a CSI mount action with a Kubernetes sync action, which confuses everybody because they're like, I thought I was going to sync a secret. What is this mount thing? So that causes its own category of problems, right? And the discussion around that was focused on the ideas of, well, could we split up the project in a way where people that want to sync secrets can continue to do so? People that want to use secret CSI for CSI-based things can also continue to do so. And if you want to do both things, you can just run both projects. And one of the aspects of that was SIGAuth leadership okay, sort of also adopting that second project as a SIGAuth subproject. With my SIGAuth lead hat on, I obviously don't have an issue with that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked Nish to talk about it. But for example, Jordan had no issues because I think we already own Secret CSI, and adding basically the same thing twice, but with better separation of concerns seems like a net positive. And I think because we retain the aspect of providers are still out of tree, it retains the spirit of the project of not becoming a kingmaker in the secret space. So I think all of those things are appropriate. Did I miss anything, y'all?
no, I think that was good. I mean, did you have any questions?
Yeah, so kind of a basic one. I haven't really gone through the doc in depth yet, but for anyone who wants to use the sync feature in that case, they would have to install this new controller, right?
Right. So I can give you a little context there, right? Today, it's all bundled into the CSI driver, like Mo mentioned, right? And the way it works is if you have to sync this Kubernetes secret, you also have to do the mount, which is not a desirable behavior. And with the proposal, we are saying it becomes its own project, and then the controller is there. And the good part about it is providers don't have to make any changes. Like all the providers, so like the GCP provider, the same container, everything, right? The only thing is it all gets packaged in a pod as a sidecar container. So you have this controller container, then you have like a Google provider, Azure provider, HashiCorp, like all the providers that we support today. The user gets to decide which providers that they want to install in the cluster. And then the communication is through Unix domain socket. So it reuses the same interface that the CSI driver uses today. And all it'll do is it'll only sync as Kubernetes secret. So like it'll skip all the mount and all of those aspects of it. And when you create the secret provider class and then another custom resource which wraps that secret provider class and also like gives like a workload identity to use, the controller will use that, go and talk to the provider, get all the secrets from external secret store, and then it will sync that as Kubernetes secret. And then periodically, it'll also update the Kubernetes secret if there's a newer version available in the external world.
Got it. So it will keep on pulling or some kind of a busy wait.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'll go through the design talk. I didn't get a chance, and if there are any questions, I'll post it on Slack.
Okay. Yeah. I think so. The caching part of it is like a driver feature that is still an opt-in from the provider perspective, right? Like to give you a little detail on how this would work is the driver will still call the provider in the caching approach to say like, hey, go get me these secrets from your external vault. The provider will go get it, right? At that point, if the provider specifically returns an error to the driver saying, hey, I am not able to reach my vault, but if you have a cache, I'm okay with you using the cache. Only if the provider explicitly tells the driver that, then the driver will go look up its internal cache, which will be implemented with this proposal, and then it will mount into the pod using that cache, like however the cache is implemented. But this feature is still controlled by providers. Like providers get to decide if they want to consume it or not. But in case of the second feature set that we're talking about, splitting the project and making it its own, like we want all providers, supported providers today to say it is something that they're okay with because it's a completely different project. You will get asked questions around it. Like also today it's an optional feature in the driver too. It's already there, but again, it's going to be an optional project. But yeah, we need buy-in from all the providers to say like, yeah, this is something we are okay with. Like we are okay with being packaged in the Helm chart and all of that. So like, I think we need consensus there. And hopefully in the coming community calls, we'll have more providers also join us to say like what their opinion is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that context. I will definitely go through the split thing proposal, and I'll go through it. I'll give my feedback in one of the subsequent calls. One question about the caching thing, right? So you mentioned that the provider can say whether it's okay for the driver to look up the cache and serve from there. But does it mean that the driver has already decided that it is going to cache for everything, or because that could be like a security thing, right?
Uh, so
It's already cached.
yeah, with the current proposal, basically it's like a double opt-in, right? So like there's a feature flag on the driver where when deploying it, you as admin can say like driver should start caching.
Mhm.
Then once the feature flag is enabled, driver will start doing it. And then a second opt-in is the provider telling the driver that, okay, you can use the cache. So like for the driver to use the cache, the provider has to still tell it.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And I think more you were mentioning about like if anyone had thoughts, right? I think for the split proposal, I think a lot of us, I mean, most of them agree that this is something that we want to do. And I think we just have to build that consensus among all the providers if that's okay. So I can start the process of also like the lazy consensus, right? So I can try and get that over Slack to see if all the providers are okay with us splitting the project and then like building the next steps for those. For the caching one, I think the concern that they brought up around the CRD was interesting. The whole node isolation and all of those. But also like some of the other suggestions that they had around like PV or any of that, like that sounds like way too complex for something here. Did anyone else had any other comments on the call yesterday?
So I believe yesterday's call was recorded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I'll
just
catch up on that.
it's a full hour basically of us talking back and forth in painful detail. Anish, what were you saying about I think you said something in summary about yesterday's call in regards to like complications and such.
So I was saying like the CRD concern that they brought up, right? Like the whole node isolation thing and like having one CRD across all drivers and all of that. Like I think I understand the concern over there. I was saying like the other suggestions that they had around like PVC, and like storing it to disk or like some building some consensus and all of that, like that becomes like a much bigger problem. I was saying like that makes like a complex design and all of that, right?
Yeah, so I don't disagree with the complexity. I think having thought about it some more, like I do think we have to come up with something though to help with the node isolation aspects though. I'm not 100% sure what that would look like. Like one thought process I had was can we start smaller and instead of supporting the complete like in the first phase, instead of supporting like restart and like cross node movement of workloads, if we start off with a local cache, that lets us build out the provider aspect, the SPC aspect, and like a bunch of the driver changes. And I don't think any of those are controversial because then you don't have any node isolation issues.
So when you say local cache, like are you referring to like in-memory cache?
Yeah, it would just be in memory, right? Like, so basically, instead of having the CRD right now and using it to coordinate across nodes and across drivers, right? If you just had it in memory, we move towards the goal of what we want without having the, like, basically all the concerns that were raised in the call are at least alleviated and we move one step closer to the thing we want. And then we can start figuring out, okay, so now I have this in-memory cache. Now, what can I do to make it so that I can have a cache that is cross node, but is respecting the constraints that I'm trying to respect, right? Like the vague thoughts I had around that were like if we built like a small service that runs like co-located with like runs in the same namespace as the driver, but not as a daemon set. So just like probably just a deployment. And if it exposes some kind of API for putting things in the cache and pulling things out of the cache, then we could enforce the boundary right there, right? So like if you're a driver instance, right, you can only put things in the cache associated with workloads co-located with your node. And if you're trying to pull from the cache, you can only pull for workloads that are currently scheduled to you. Right. So it basically enforces node isolation. and it would just be a regular single like it would be a what am I trying to say? It would be a regular deployment, so not a daemon set and not cross scheduled across everything. So you could schedule it on your infra nodes if you want to. Right? You don't have to run it. I mean, you wouldn't even necessarily need to run it on the cluster per se, as long as you have network access to it.
But I mean, at the end of it, we still have to figure out how that deployment will store all of the cache contents.
Yeah, I think that part doesn't go away.
But if we move the problem of node isolation from the driver to that, then I think it just comes down to, then the problem of node isolation is solved, but it comes down to like, do we want to persist that as API objects or not?
Yeah, I mean, but even if you persist them, right, you just wouldn't give the driver access to read or write them.
Right.
Right. So only the thing that's enforcing the isolation would have the access.
Something else that was
go for it, Andrew.
Something else that was interesting for me was the whole conversation around the key and how we would protect that, because I assume we would still want everything to be encrypted.
Right. So I was wondering if we should let that at least sort of be partially a deployment configuration. So like the thought process there would be, like I think having purely driver local caches has, like, I don't think the restart problem is the foundational one. I think the actual problem is workloads move across nodes, and that's like a normal thing in Kubernetes. And so having a cache that's purely driver local, meaning it's node local, will just produce weird flakiness when you're offline, because it'll be like, oh, if I happen to schedule to the right node, I work. And if I don't happen to schedule to the right node, I don't work. So I don't want that. That to me is just like broken. But if you have a centralized place that is holding the state, then you don't have that weird flaky behavior. And I think what that enables is then you can pick, do you care about restart or not? And if you don't care about restart, then you could run that central service in a way that it does not store anything, right? It's basically the cache is being held for you, and if it restarts, you lose the cache. And so if the restart case is important to you, then you would tell it to persist its cache, right? And in that case, yes, we have to solve the problem, but I think there is a significant benefit by actually giving people the choice, because instead of arbitrarily saying that if you use this feature, you must support restart, and thus you lose the ability to never store anything in the API. I think giving the flexibility there might be useful. In regards to how we could maybe protect the key, that one gets hard. I suspect it really comes still down to like having the secret provider cache CRD and then also encrypting it with a key. I don't think I'm aware of like a pattern where you could, like, even if you have this central, I guess you could purposely only have one instance of this cache thing running instead of like multiple instances, purely around the aspect of like only interfacing with like one node and like maybe one TPM or something. Like, I'm just trying to think about like how, like if you're less concerned about like HA stuff for such a service and more concerned about it being able to like retain the key without having to write it to the API. Yeah. But yeah, I think it comes down to we don't have a generic way of having like cross node TPMs that can sort of share state. If we had that, then we could certainly build on top of it, but that doesn't exist as a generic concept in Cube. Yeah, so I'm not sure what the extension points there would need to be for someone to be able to sort of express all the things that they might want.
Is it safe to assume that whoever is going to do this disconnected stuff with like they're going to consume CSI driver, they would also figure out a solution for KMS? Then we can do some kind of hierarchy in that single service that could encrypt it, they encrypt the contents in the custom research, right? Using like the key stored in external vault. Like
No,
basic hierarchy we built for KMS, we built it here.
Maybe I didn't fully understand because I'm not sure what you mean on the key hierarchy part. Like, would it, are you saying that instead of us locally solving the encryption at rest problem, that we would just support like over a UDS, a KMS v2 plugin, and then you can configure it?
Yeah. Like you basically just have a remote key, and then you can encrypt that local key with that remote key, and then use a local key for encrypting all the CRD stuff, and then store that local key with the CRD, the encrypted local key.
Isn't it a deck? Isn't it a deck, not a keg?
It is.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think I don't think there's a hierarchy, right? It's just envelope encryption. Right. Like when we said
So I was saying hierarchy just in the context that it's a single deck, basically. It's a single deck for all CRDs, not like a 1:1 like the KMS v1.
oh, I mean, but yeah, okay, I see what you mean. Why would we not reuse the KDF logic, I guess?
We can, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a separate problem, but at a high level though, the suggestion is why not just use the same interface that Kubernetes exposes for KMS v2 as the encryption? That's not a bad idea. I think that could work. Would we provide a built-in KMS plugin that's just storing the key in a Kubernetes secret, so that way you can get, I mean, you might have to build such a thing just for testing, like in the repo. So it might just be easier to just let people use it.
Right.
That could work, I guess. So it would allow people to have existing KMS v2 plugins, which will be all the cloud providers in like a couple of months, to just use them if they want to. Again, if they enable the feature to begin with.
Yeah, and provided they solve this for encryption and rest, like if they have some other alternative, right? Like then we don't have to worry about it. Like if their plugin is designed to operate at offline modes, then like it would, and in case this service restarts, it would still work.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, going back to what you said, like starting off with just building the interfaces and all of that, and starting off with a local cache, I think sounds like a good first step.
Did we lose Anish, or did we lose me?
My video's moving. I think your video's stuck.
Yeah, I can hear it ish.
I can hear
I
Anish.
can hear too.
I think lost more. And now your video is back.
Yeah, it just froze, and then yeah. So I heard like starting, and then you froze. I was like, huh, I wonder if it's my internet or Anish's internet.
So I was saying that the first step that you recommended, right? Like basically we start off building the interfaces and then using the local in-memory cache. Like I think that sounds like a good first step to start off.
Yeah, I didn't get any feeling from anyone on the call that they were against like the feature as like a principle, like we shouldn't do the thing at all, right? So I don't think we're blocked there. Though, like, you know, like basically like it was I think Michael and Tahir and Jordan, right? So basically three separate folks from Google. Am I frozen again?
Yes. Did anyone else have any thoughts on the caching stuff? The first step.
So I guess I'm okay with building this like hierarchy of caches as well. And then going with that, should we maybe go to Seagull more frequently to get this sort of reviews?
Sorry, what was the last part?
Should we go to Seagull more frequently with our thoughts on the caching bit to get their reviews?
Yeah,
Oh,
we can definitely do that. I think like once we have a different proposal or something, like we can go to Sigoth with it and then see what their feedback is. Sorry, Mo, what were you saying before you froze?
I don't know what was the last thing I said.
Yeah, I think we were talking you were talking about Sigoth not opposing the feature in general. It's just like
Yeah, so I didn't see any pushback in on like a matter of principle, right? So I don't think we're blocked there. I think we can keep progressing. I guess I don't fully know how like releases for secret CSI work, but I don't particularly feel bad like if we have a release where like various iterations of the feature are there, like as long as it's not like somehow insecure or like broken or whatever, like I don't think that's a big deal. And
Would
sorry, go ahead, Nadir.
so I wanted to ask, we would go with this in as an alpha feature initially?
Yeah, normally I think anything new starts out as an alpha feature.
yeah. Yeah, so it's like an opt-in feature with a feature flag, and then default is false, and then we can start with that.
Yeah. I think Andre, if you were asking about like having more often discussions with Sigoth, yeah, I mean any sub project is always welcome to, or really anyone is always welcome to come have discussions with us. Yeah, I think we were like, if I had any feedback, I think maybe we waited a little bit too long to have that discussion. But it's okay, right? Like I don't think we necessarily are too far behind or anything. Also, did I spell separate wrong? Right. I was saying that. I was like, I don't understand. What do you want me to do, Google Docs? Oh, yeah, there's an A, of course. I can't spell. Okay, cool. So I think on the other aspect, right, the separating a project out, I think Anish, you have the next sort of big action item, right, which is the doc. So that way we can sort of formalize what we're requesting.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really any blockers on that one though, right? There's nothing really open other than just do the work and separate the stuff out.
Yeah. So I will have the doc. I'll also add it to the SIGOT agenda for next week, just to share the doc and then do a demo, the one I did in the CSI call. And I will start a thread on Slack, just tagging all the providers so that we get that consensus that everyone's okay with doing something like this. Okay. Any other discussion? Anything else anyone wants to add on those two topics? Okay.
I guess I was gonna ask. So like Amit, I see you're from Google. Do you foresee like GKE using either of the features, the controller or the caching? Just curious.
I'm not really sure at this point, but then yeah, I think both of them are really helpful features for customers. So the disconnected thing and sync itself. So we advertise. So sync is right now an alpha feature, right? If people look up the docs, so if it's like a separate component, I think that might actually be good. So
So that does remind me. At some point after the separate project exists, or I guess what I would say is once a separate project exists, I think to me that is the point where we would deprecate that alpha feature. Is that contentious?
The alpha feature exists.
Say what?
So I think you said after the alpha feature exists, we start the deprecation?
After the separate project that is the controller exists. So you actually have a different way of doing the same thing instead of, right? I don't know if it's really valuable to deprecate the feature with no other option. I don't really know what that means.
Right.
It's like, it's deprecated, it sucks. Like that's not useful. So I think if once a separate project exists, I think we can deprecate it, and I don't know, you can pick whatever arbitrarily long time before we remove the thing. And I know Anish, you had said that we would like do like a V2 of secret CSI. I think that's also valid. There just has to be some definition of like how long is V1 maintained after V2, if that's the approach we take.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I agree. So once we have the project, we can basically define like a timeline and make an announcement saying like, hey, start using that because it'll go away.
yeah, I believe so long as there is a well-defined cutover period and clear instructions and time given, I think that should be okay. I mean, the two have to coexist for some time at least. We can't just drop one and overnight switch to the other one, I think. But I think that's a given. So,
Yeah,
uh,
none of us are
Ashwin,
fancy users.
Ashwin here on the call might have some opinion on that. Um, Ashwin, are you there?
Yes, Anand. Regarding the coexistence,
Yeah, so the sync to Kubernetes secret, right? If that
yeah,
gets split up into a different project, and then at some point we'll have to deprecate the current way of syncing as a Kubernetes secret.
yeah.
There will be some cutover period, is what was said. But yeah, you have any specific opinion on that?
No, nothing at this point. I think we might have to discuss that internally first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Amit and Ashwin, do y'all mind taking that as an action item just to get some feedback?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I had one other thought about the other feature that I forgot. I think I spoke with Andre about this a while back, but I want to ask the larger group. So I know caching, as described in that doc, is very much focused on offline scenarios. And I don't think we need to discuss this as part of that doc, but I just was curious if folks had opinions on caching as purely as a performance improvement. So as a for example, I could imagine a provider, if we gave them a hint that we had something in our cache and it was a certain age, old, like from the current time, the provider could simply say, I'm not going to bother fetching that again. If you have it, it's probably good enough. Just use it. So again, it would end up being opt-in, right? Because you would have to enable the cache and you would have to have a provider that supported the feature. Do folks have thoughts on such a capability?
So if I can understand that correctly, right? So a provider could sort of advertise that, let's say if the driver has a secret and it's like less than X seconds old, don't even bother asking me, kind of a thing.
So, for example, if you have a deployment with multiple pod, right, you basically fetch the secret for the first pod, and for the others, you can just take things from the cache.
Could Amit and Andrea repeat exactly what you just said? Because my wife turned on the Bluetooth speaker and my Mac decided to start using it. So I'm sure that she was just immediately blasted by this call in the other room. But what did you guys say?
Yeah, so I was just asking, like, does it basically mean that if, let's say, the secret was fetched um, in the last X number of seconds, then the driver doesn't even ask the provider to get it again. It just uses what it has, kind of a thing.
So I think on like the order of seconds, such a thing is the driver could just automatically do, like literally on the order of like 10 seconds, the driver could do that. But I'm more asking about, say, on a longer time window, in that case, the driver would ask the provider, hey, I want you to fetch this secret, but by the way, I happen to have it in my cache. My cache is like 4 minutes out of date from the current time. You can decide to go fetch it again if you want to, or you can just return me a specific response that just tells me to use my cache because you're okay with like a 4-minute stale secret. But again, it would be the provider, once again, very carefully opting in based on the entire input. So it would decide.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, the provider doesn't really have enough context to decide this on a case by case basis. Uh, like for example, right? How would it probably take a different decision for a secret foo and a secret bar? Like, there's nothing that tells it like I should behave differently for one of them, assuming all other parameters are same, like it's 4 minutes uniformly. So could this be sort of a thing that's configured in the mount configuration by the pod owner? Like, I can tolerate like a 10-minute delay, whereas the other pod owner configures like I can tolerate like a 1-minute delay, and based on that, maybe the provider like changes its decision.
I think either way, you have to have some way of communicating the configuration between both disparate systems, right? Like the driver has to know some way per provider. I don't remember. Is there any place that you have such a config, like config that is like per provider that the driver knows about?
Um, I don't think so. I'm not actually sure, so I'll probably let Anish or someone answer that.
No, typically, like if you're adding some new feature, I mean new attribute, right? Like it comes down to like, is this only provider specific? If it is, then providers can just add it as part of their schema, like the parameter schema. And then if we think it benefits all the providers, then basically it becomes part of the core API object on the CSI driver side. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, there's no field today that is provider specific that the driver is aware of.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know the answer to the question of should we have the level of like per mount granularity. Maybe like I could imagine a provider having its own config that defines like what is allowed and what's not. It could have a config that's basically static for all things, or it could have a config that's like, I don't know, a regex or something that says like, oh, these are my important secrets, so those have to have a small cache because they change frequently, and these are my secrets that don't change. Right? Like, I do think there is a certain nuance, right? Like, if you have a certificate that lasts for like a year and it doesn't get, and you don't expect it to be revoked, then like you don't need to refresh it all the time, and you don't need
Sure.
you don't need to be asked, right? But if you have like a token that's changing on the order of hours, then you might be like, yeah, no, just keep asking me because it's a much more hot secret or whatever. So I don't know if it should be static because I feel like we end up limiting providers then. So I could go either way. I'm mostly what I don't like today is we like if you just run a bunch of pods at the same time, we will just hammer the hell out of the provider. And if the provider doesn't have like an inbuilt cache to like do something about it, it's just like, oh, you have 10 pods and each of them has like 5 secrets. Cool, we're gonna call you 10 times now. That was awesome. Right, and just sort of scales out really poorly, especially on a restart.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I think that there should be some configuration at maybe the provider level, or yeah, like where you can specify like the toleration, like how much old secret can be tolerated. I'm not very sure where it should be, but yeah, some tuning would be good.
Just another question here. In this case, we'd also probably have to pay attention to what we're doing with the reconciler, like rotating the secrets, because it seems a bit conflictual that we want to rotate the secrets and at the same time use the cache.
Yeah, I think basically the cache TTL should be configurable, right? Like, because if the rotation interval is faster than the cache TTL, then basically you'll just keep refreshing it at that time.
Yeah, presumably we could just validate that, right? Like one has to be larger than the other, right? So you could just put that in the validation of the CRD.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on these two topics? No? Okay. Yeah, the only other discussion item I added was the release 1.3.5. So there are no CVEs in 1.3.4, but there was like a Helm chart change to basically use digests for images. So I was thinking we can cut a release next week for this one. I think that was it. Any other topics anyone else wants to discuss? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.